How bad can 4 days at a new job really be? That's what I told myself when I got hired as a non-emergency EMT for a private ambulance transport company. I'd just finished a 6-month community college course, barely scraping by, but still hopeful. My instructor had said, "Don't worry, most companies will train you on the job." That gave me enough confidence to apply. When I got the call saying I was hired, I was ecstatic. It felt like the first step towards something better, a new beginning. I didn't care that the pay was low or that the company seemed disorganized. I needed the experience. I needed to prove to myself that I could do this. But from day one, I knew something was off. No orientation, no training. I was thrown into the back of a van with a driver I'd never met, transporting dialysis patients, elderly folks, and people with complicated medical histories. I had no idea what forms to fill out, how to use half the equipment, or even where to log my hours. Every time I asked questions, people just shrugged or said, "Figure it out." The staff was cold. The office was cramped and smelled like stale coffee and bleach. No one introduced themselves. And the boss? A sharp-tongued woman named Karen, who barely acknowledged my existence unless it was to glare at me. Still, I showed up, day after day, 4 long days. I told myself it would get better, that the discomfort was just part of being new. But on the 4th day, I was called into the office. Karen sat behind her desk, arms crossed, expression unreadable. A man I hadn't seen before slid a piece of paper across the desk. It listed reasons for my termination. Lack of preparedness, inadequate knowledge, not a good fit. I nodded. I couldn't even argue. Honestly, they weren't wrong. I was unprepared. But I'd hoped they would at least try to help me learn. I signed the paper quietly and asked, "Will my paycheck be ready today?" The man looked at Karen, then back at me. "We'll mail it to you," he said, voice casual, like it wasn't a big deal. I left the office feeling humiliated. 4 days. That's all it took for them to decide I wasn't worth the trouble. But I told myself to let it go. At least I'd get paid for my time. What I didn't know then was getting my paycheck would be a battle of its own. And Karen? She had no idea that she'd just picked a fight with the wrong person. A week went by. No check. At first, I gave them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was a delay with payroll. Maybe they needed time to process my hours. I didn't want to seem pushy, so I waited. But by the end of that 2nd week, I called the office. The woman who answered didn't even say hello, just barked, "Hold, please," and transferred me to a voicemail that was full. I tried again the next day, and the next, still nothing. On the 4th call, I finally got through to someone who claimed they couldn't find my hours, and that someone from payroll would get back to me. That never happened. Then came my first real encounter with Karen since the day I was fired. She picked up the phone like I was some scammer calling to harass her. "You again?" she snapped. "We told you we'd mail it. You worked here 4 days. Calm down." I kept my voice steady. "It's been 2 weeks. By law, final paychecks are supposed to be given immediately upon termination or within 72 hours. There was a long pause. Then she laughed. "Is that so? Did you go to law school in the last 2 weeks, sweetheart?" And then, click, she hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, heart pounding. I wasn't even angry yet. I was just stunned. Who treats people like this? I tried again the next day. Different phone, different name, same result. Hang up, voicemail, excuses. I emailed, no reply. I even drove to the office once, but no one answered the door. At that point, I stopped trying to reason with them. I sat down and started researching California labor laws in depth. That's when I found it. If an employer fails to pay final wages on time, they're on the hook for a full day's wages for every day the check is late, up to 30 days. And for me, that meant about $150 per day. Suddenly, it all changed. I stopped calling, I stopped begging. Every day they didn't pay me was money added to what they legally owed me. But I didn't just sit idle. I began documenting everything. Dates I called, names of people I spoke with, notes on what they said. I printed screenshots, saved emails, and started building a paper trail. 2 weeks later, I finally received a check. But it wasn't the full amount. They'd paid me for only 2 days. Apparently I'd crossed over into a new pay period, and they decided to wait to pay the other 2. Another excuse. so I called again. "You people are impossible," Karen said when she finally picked up. "You're not even worth this check. You should be grateful we're paying you at all." Grateful? I hung up. And I knew what I had to do. I filed a claim with the California Labor Commissioner's office that very night. I uploaded every document, every note, every screenshot. A week later, I received confirmation. My case was moving forward. I wasn't just chasing a paycheck anymore. This had become something else entirely. Karen thought I was weak, that I was naive, that I'd disappear like all the other underpaid, overworked people who'd passed through her doors. She had no idea I was just getting started. Filing the claim with the labor commissioner felt like the first breath I'd taken in weeks. For the first time, I wasn't being ignored or belittled. I was being heard, and I had documentation to back up every word. Within days, I got a notice for an initial mediation session, an informal meeting where both parties could attempt to resolve the dispute before it went to a formal hearing. I showed up early, clutching a manila folder filled with everything: printed phone records, email copies, a timeline of missed payments, even a notarized letter from my landlord confirming I hadn't moved. I'd read somewhere that employers sometimes lie and say they couldn't find the former employee. I was ready for that. Karen walked in 15 minutes late, wearing oversized sunglasses and chewing gum like she was above it all. She didn't look at me. She didn't acknowledge the mediator. She just sat down, crossed her arms, and announced, "I'm offering her $500 to go away." The room went silent. The mediator blinked. "That's your offer?" Karen shrugged. "She worked 4 days. This is ridiculous." I stayed calm. "You withheld my paycheck for almost a month, ignored calls, and I have proof. Legally, you owe me over $3,000. That's not including penalties if this goes to judgment." Karen rolled her eyes. "This was a setup. You knew the rules. You're just trying to take advantage of a small business." That's when she said it. "And let's not forget, you almost killed one of our patients because you didn't know how to operate the gurney. You were a liability from day one." I sat there stunned. That never happened. Not even close. I looked to the mediator. That incident was never listed in the termination document. In fact, I signed that document, and it simply said I wasn't a good fit. Nothing about misconduct or endangerment. Karen glared at me like I had just committed a crime by remembering the truth. The mediator calmly asked Karen if she had any documentation or reports about this near-death experience. She didn't. The session ended quickly after that. Karen refused to negotiate. She stormed out of the room, muttering about lawyers and entitlement. I didn't say a word. I just handed the mediator a copy of the California Labor Code, already highlighted. 3 weeks later, I received notice of a formal labor hearing. This time, I came even more prepared. I had requested my phone records from my carrier, highlighted every call I made to their office. I included a notarized statement from my neighbor who'd seen me checking my mailbox daily. I printed out screenshots of their company's Google listing, showing their listed hours and number, the same one I had been calling. I even had copies of text messages from an EMT I'd briefly worked with, stating, "They never train anyone. You're lucky you got out when you did." The day of the hearing, Karen arrived with a thick folder and a smug grin. She brought her husband, who, as she loudly announced to the clerk, was a police officer, like that meant anything. Once inside, she tried every excuse in the book. She claimed I had moved and they didn't have my updated address. I handed the judge my landlord's letter. She said I had changed my phone number and ignored their calls. I handed over the printed call logs. She said they mailed the check promptly, but it must have gotten lost in transit. I pointed out the postmark date, 29 days after termination. She claimed I never clocked in correctly and had fabricated my hours. I presented a screenshot of their digital log system showing 4 confirmed workdays, each with timestamps. She even accused me, again, of endangering a patient. The judge paused, looked at her paperwork, and said calmly, "Why is none of that reflected in this signed termination document?" Karen didn't answer. She sat back, her husband fidgeting beside her, as the judge turned to me. I didn't need to speak. My paperwork did all the talking. I left the hearing feeling calm, not victorious, not smug, just steady. I'd done everything right, and whether the judge ruled in my favor or not, I knew I'd stood up for myself in a way I never had before. But deep down, I had a feeling. Karen wasn't just going to lose this case. She was about to learn what it felt like to be held accountable for the first time in her career. I didn't sleep the night after the hearing, not because I was anxious about the outcome. I had done everything I could, but because the adrenaline hadn't left my body yet. It was strange. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't consumed by fear or self-doubt. I felt powerful. I wasn't some helpless ex-employee begging for scraps. I was a woman who'd been wronged and who fought back with facts, with proof, with the law on her side. Still, part of me wondered if it would be enough. A week passed, then two. Finally, I got the letter. I unfolded it slowly, my hands trembling slightly. And there it was, in black and white. Decision, in favor of the claimant. They ruled that Karen's company had violated California labor laws by failing to provide my final paycheck in the legally required time frame. The judge not only awarded me the wages owed, but also 29 days' worth of penalty pay, an additional $4,350 on top of my actual earnings. But that wasn't all. The judge added 4 extra days of penalty pay because the company had mailed my check on a Friday before a long holiday weekend, further delaying the postmark. It was a technicality, but the law didn't care, and neither did I. My total payout? Just over $5,000. All for 4 days of work and a month of being ignored, gaslit, and disrespected. It felt poetic. But even more satisfying was what happened during that final hearing. Something small, almost throwaway at the time, but with ripple effects I didn't fully grasp until later. You see, while Karen was ranting in the mediation room weeks earlier, insisting that I was trying to scam her, she had made an offhanded comment about how none of those lazy drivers deserve overtime anyway. Half of them clock in early just to milk the hours. I had nodded along at the time, feigning disinterest. But in that moment, I had casually said to the mediator, "Oh, I thought California required double time after 12 hours. That's what one of the drivers told me." The mediator had tilted her head slightly, made a quick note, and moved on. I thought nothing of it. But now, a few days after winning the case, I got a voicemail from a blocked number. It was short, clipped. A woman's voice. "Thank you. We're looking into other things now." That was it. No name, no context. But I knew exactly what it meant. Karen hadn't just violated my rights. She'd been shortchanging her employees for who knows how long. And now she'd drawn the attention of the very department she thought she could manipulate. She thought the labor hearing was the end of the story. But in reality, it was just the start of hers unraveling. A few weeks after receiving my payout, I thought the whole ordeal was finally behind me. I'd moved on, taken a part-time job while applying to EMT positions that actually trained their people, and was beginning to feel like myself again. But Karen? She wasn't done digging her own grave. One evening, I received an email from the Labor Commissioner's office. The subject line read, "Additional inquiry, wage practices, confidential." I opened it slowly. It explained that, during the course of reviewing my case, the mediator had noted a potential wage violation involving unpaid double-time hours for other employees. They were conducting a preliminary investigation into the company's broader labor practices, and they had a few questions for me. They asked if I had any knowledge or documents suggesting this was an ongoing issue, not just with me, but with other staff. I didn't have much, but I remembered the text from a driver I'd met during my first shift. He'd said, "Nobody here gets paid right. Overtime, forget it." I'd kept the messages. I forwarded the screenshots, along with a short statement describing the culture at the company, the rushed onboarding, lack of training, the dismissive attitude from management. I added that it seemed like most employees didn't question things because they were afraid of being fired. 2 days later, another email came. The investigation had been escalated. Apparently, I wasn't the only one. 3 other former employees had filed wage claims within the same month. All of them described similar treatment: delayed paychecks, threats, excuses, and missing overtime. One of them had worked there for 2 years and claimed he'd never once been paid double time, even after 14-hour shifts. Suddenly, what started as one woman fighting for a 4-day paycheck was turning into something much bigger. And Karen? She had no idea the walls were closing in. That was, until she made a fatal mistake. She sent me a cease and desist letter. It came from some law firm I'd never heard of, clearly small time. The letter accused me of defamation, slander, and intent to damage the reputation of a private entity. It demanded that I cease all communication with regulatory bodies regarding this matter. I read it 3 times and laughed out loud. Then I forwarded it directly to the Labor Commissioner's office with a short note. Received this today. Thought you'd want to see it. Less than a week later, Karen was served with a subpoena. The Department of Industrial Relations had launched a formal audit into her company's payroll records. That's when things really started unraveling. Turns out Karen had not only failed to pay double time, she'd been manipulating timesheets, forcing employees to clock out and back in again to dodge overtime thresholds. She'd also hired independent contractors for EMT work, something strictly prohibited under state law, just to avoid paying benefits. I didn't have to do anything anymore. The system took over. I watched from the sidelines as headlines began to appear in local news. Private ambulance company under investigation for labor violations. Whistleblowers detail toxic culture, wage theft at transport firm. And then the final blow. An anonymous post showed up on Reddit under the EMT subreddit. Someone claiming to be an employee of the company posted, "Management is panicking. Karen's husband, the cop, tried to intimidate one of the investigators, backfired. Now they're looking into him too." Whether that part was true or not, I had no idea. But the damage was done. Karen, who once laughed at me for quoting labor law, was now facing thousands in penalties, potential criminal charges, and the collapse of everything she built on fear and arrogance. And me? I was already gone. No vengeance, no shouting matches, no gloating. I just forwarded emails, told the truth, and let her lies catch up with her. In the end, Karen destroyed herself. All I did was hand her the shovel. Karen's downfall wasn't explosive. It didn't happen in a single moment. It unraveled thread by thread like an old sweater you keep tugging until there's nothing left but loose yarn and shame. A month after the audit began, her company's operating license was temporarily suspended due to non-compliance with wage and labor laws. Word spread fast through the local EMT and healthcare community. Clinics and dialysis centers canceled contracts. Staff started quitting en masse, those who hadn't already left. I heard from one of the drivers I briefly worked with. He called to thank me. "You know, she made us pay for our own uniforms," he said. "She told us it was standard. HR just confirmed it's illegal." More employees came forward. A class action lawsuit began forming. Labor violations, tax fraud, unethical practices, even false billing allegations. And Karen? She stopped showing up to the office altogether. Her name was tainted. Her reputation, once held up by fear and silence, was now buried under testimony, screenshots, and subpoenas. Her husband, the cop, was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. That part hit the news too. Ambulance company under investigation, owner's husband tied to intimidation allegations. It was no longer just a bad week for her. It was an implosion. I stayed quiet through it all. I didn't post online. I didn't gloat. I didn't call anyone to rub it in. I didn't need to. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. I found a new EMT position, this time with a reputable company that trained its employees properly, offered real support, and actually followed the law. The difference was night and day. On my first day, my supervisor shook my hand and said, "We're glad to have you here. Let us know what you need to succeed." I almost cried. A few months later, during a workplace training session on labor laws and employee rights, the instructor mentioned our rights around final paychecks and retaliation. He paused and added, "There was actually a recent case not far from here. A worker reported a late paycheck, and it led to an investigation that uncovered massive wage theft. That employee saved dozens of people from being taken advantage of." The room went quiet. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Because I knew exactly who that story was about. I had walked into that job thinking I was just another disposable new hire. Karen treated me like I was weak, inexperienced, and stupid. She thought if she was loud enough, mean enough, dismissive enough, I'd disappear. Instead, I became her reckoning. Not with violence, not with revenge, but with patience, truth, and the confidence to say, you don't get to treat people like this and walk away. And in the end, Karen didn't just lose a lawsuit. She lost her company. She lost her status. She lost her voice in a world where she once spoke over everyone. And me? I gained mine. 6 months after the final ruling, my life had changed in quiet, meaningful ways. I was no longer that anxious new EMT, scared of asking questions or being seen as difficult. I knew my rights now, I knew my worth, and most importantly, I trusted my voice. I was working full-time, feeling respected, supported, and challenged in all the right ways. The trauma of those 4 days at Karen's company had faded into the background, mostly. Until one afternoon, during a mandatory ethics and compliance training at my new job, something unexpected happened. We were sitting in a conference room, half watching a slideshow on labor code updates, when the trainer pulled up a real-life case study. He said, "This next example is from a public labor ruling that made headlines earlier this year. It's now used in several training programs across the state as a cautionary tale." He clicked to the next slide. There it was, the company name, the exact timeline, the details of the audit, even a redacted version of the judgment, my story, my case. The trainer continued. This began with a single employee who was fired after only 4 days. She filed a late paycheck complaint which uncovered systematic wage violations, worker misclassification, and even intimidation from management. The room was dead silent. He turned to us and said, "Let this be a reminder. The law doesn't care how long you worked somewhere. One voice, backed by the truth, can lead to real accountability." I didn't say anything. I just sat there, heart pounding in my chest. No one knew it was me, and I didn't need them to. Because in that moment, I realized something. Karen didn't just lose her company. She became the example, the warning, the bullet point in someone else's slideshow. And I became the reminder that speaking up, no matter how small you feel, can change everything. That's the twist, isn't it? She tried to erase me, tried to silence me with hang-ups, insults, intimidation, and legal threats. She wanted me to vanish into the pile of people she'd used, discarded, and underpaid. But now her failure is public record. And my voice? It's part of the training that protects workers like me from bosses like her. There's a certain poetry in that. So to anyone out there sitting quietly in their car after being disrespected at work, wondering if it's even worth fighting back, to anyone who's been made to feel like they're just lucky to have a job, even when that job robs them of dignity, to anyone who's been told to stay quiet, don't make trouble, this story is for you. You don't have to scream, you don't have to burn bridges, you don't have to have all the answers right away, but you do have the right to speak up. And sometimes that's all it takes to bring down a giant. So no, I didn't burn her world down. I just turned on the light and watched as her lies collapsed under the weight of the truth.